As you know, we did unveil the Nuclear Fuel Cycle Royal Commission's report. And today we launch a campaign to promote discussion of this report. We want people to get involved. We want them to go to our website to sign up and to stay informed about this important process. The reason we need to do this is that this is such an important question and it requires a deep engagement with the South Australian community. What we said at the beginning of this exercise is that we wanted to involve all South Australians in exploring the practical, financial and ethical questions associated with deepening our involvement in the nuclear fuel cycle. We want people to come together and engage in a public discussion which takes them from their top-of-mind opinions about this matter to wise judgments that will assist us in making our decisions as a government. So the process that we intend to take is, of course, the Royal Commission report. The second phase, which I'll outline in a moment, is a statewide community consultation, and when that concludes, a government response. So the way in which the Royal Commission investigated the nuclear fuel cycle was to split it up into four areas: mining, enrichment, energy and storage. And it made findings about mining and recommendations about mining, namely that there were great opportunities for expanding our mining industry and that we should pursue them, and it made certain recommendations about that. In relation to enrichment, it made findings that there was no immediate term viable option for the expansion of enrichment due to the oversupply of enriched nuclear fuel cycle material, but that it made findings that on a certain basis the leasing back of material for storage purposes could create opportunities for enrichment, but that in the short term there was no viable option for enrichment. In relation to energy, it also made findings that there was no short-term viable proposition for the pursuit of energy production from nuclear sources. But given the likely inability of us to meet our carbon reduction targets in this country, it believed it was wise to at least open the possibility of the production of energy in the future, but once again did not believe that that was a short-term viable option. And in relation to storage, as you noted, it found that it was both viable and created real opportunities for prosperity for the South Australian community, and recommended that we pursue that. So those were the essential elements of the Royal Commission report. Royal Commission also made certain findings about how we should pursue the matter. It made decisions that we should establish an independent agency. It made a recommendation that an advisory board should supervise the work of that agency, and that it was necessary to pursue a bipartisan approach. I can indicate it is our intention to establish an independent agency to supervise the public engagement process. An advisory board will be established to oversee that process, and in all of these things we will be undertaking a bipartisan approach. We have, in all steps of the process, sought to involve the Leader of the Opposition and indeed both the government and opposition parties at a national level, as we sought to approach this matter on a bipartisan basis. And of course the other parties that are represented in the Australian political scene have also been invited to be part of this consensus. So the process has three phases from this point onwards. The first stage is essentially to involve as many people as possible in this process. And the way in which we seek to do this is through the creation of a citizens' jury. 25,000 South Australians will be invited to participate in this process, from whom 50 will be randomly selected. They'll be selected having regard to the sort of approach that you take if you were constructing a jury trial in a criminal matter. but there will be a gloss in that the census data will be used to standardise for gender, for regional and for age. And what the jury will be considering is to identify what parts of the Royal Commission's report everyone needs to discuss. So this is about a group of citizens essentially trying to establish the agenda. I mean, it's a very large report. Many of elements of the report might be regarded as things that people don't need any further information on. They're quite clear about the matters that are contained within it, and they don't need any further discussion. But there'll be some areas that will need further focus, and so that deeper dive will be identified by the citizens' jury. The next step is to get people involved, to get people to join the conversation. The citizens' jury will obviously involve people being able to watch that, so we'll invite the general public to participate in the citizens' jury. But the next phase will be to encourage as many South Australians as possible to start their own conversation, and we'll be providing them with the information and tools to do so. So traditional methods such as free call services, websites, face-to-face community meetings will be established. There'll be extensive social media engagement. Aboriginal people will have a specific engagement to make sure that they are actively involved in this process. And so this point of this phase of the process is to involve as many people as possible on the issues that have been identified as by the citizens' jury as the ones that people most want to be informed about. So that community feedback will then be sent to the next phase of the process, which is the second citizens' jury. Once again, drawn from 25,000 South Australians, 350 will be randomly selected, including the first jury. And the point of this part of the process is to evaluate the feedback from the statewide consultation and weigh up the choices and options that will need to be considered by the government. The jury will produce a report summarising the community's position, which the government will then consider in its response to the Royal Commission report. This report will be a key consideration in the government's decisions on the next steps. So these three phases that we have, the phase of identifying the agenda, involving people, and then clarifying the choices that government will make, will assist us in making a decision as a government at the end of the process. The timelines are set out here. We've already had the Royal Commission report. The first jury will span over June and July, the statewide consultation between July and September, the second citizens' jury in October, the jury's final report in November, and then a government response which will be presented to Parliament later in the year. Now, these are just indicative timelines. They could be varied by circumstance or indeed at the request of any one of these processes. The point, though, is to put the government in a position to make a decision at the end of this process after having the fullest and most mature debate that we can possibly organise. The estimated costs associated with this will be less than $1 million, and it is deliberately an extensive process because we believe there couldn't be a more important question that faces the South Australian community.
Is the jury at liberty to say, we don't like the idea of this and, and not move on with it, even beyond the first phase?
Yes, they could say it.
Would you take that seriously, or do you just...
Of course we would. Ultimately, it's a matter for government about what it chooses to do, but of course. I mean, you can remember that this is all, that the fundamental underpinning of this is that there needs to be broad community support. I mean, this is going nowhere if it is going to be the subject of political controversy, because no serious investor will cooperate with us. No international partner will want to be part of entering into what is a long-term and extraordinarily expensive set of investments if they don't think the community is going to be able to deliver on them. And so the community needs to accept this.
Premier, does it worry you though that by the time we get to November, those who you're trying to win over, and I'm talking the general public, they'll glaze over by then. They'll be thinking, is this ever going to happen? How many more layers do we have to endure before a decision's made?
Yeah. Well, I think that's a good question. I mean, there is a tension between fatiguing people with ongoing discussions about this and also making sure that as many people as possible get to hear the information. The truth is there's very low awareness of the Nuclear Fuel Cycle Royal Commission. We know that from our own research. So that's the starting point. It might be familiar for people that are used to covering political events, and certainly for us, but out there in the general community there's very low level awareness about this. So that's the first thing. The second thing is that through the citizens' jury, hopefully what we'll identify are those things that people are actually interested in hearing more information about. So obviously we don't want to keep talking to people about things they're already familiar with. The citizens' jury will say, look, the thing we're really worried about might be transport. How are you going to get this material from one place to another? Through which communities does it go? What's the security? So they might say, for the sake of argument, we accept that you can safely store it, but how do you get it to the storage place? That might be what's really worrying people, and so that's the thing that we would spend our time and effort on. So I think by, rather than us guessing what's on people's minds, the citizens' jury will assist us in really working out what is exercising the minds of South Australians.
Just so we're clear though, and you say ultimately government makes decisions.
Yes.
But you also want consensus and bipartisan consensus. So are you saying that if by November you haven't won over federal Labor or the state opposition, or one of the sectors that you're wanting to win over, that you're not going to proceed?
I think that it's pretty clear that unless there's a broad political consensus in this country and in the state about the matter, it'd be unlikely to be successful. What the state of any one opinion poll might be might not necessarily be a measure, though, of broad community acceptance. I mean, I don't think it is just a straight quantitative assessment. I think that really what we're consulting to reach is the position where people are saying, look, we've had our say and now we're content for you to make a judgment. That's the qualitative judgment we need to make, of people saying, look, we've expressed our views, we're comfortable with the fact that we've had our say, we think we've explored all the issues, it's now over to our elected representatives to make a judgment. But look, I can't see this being successful if one of the major political parties broke off and said we're directly opposed to this. I can't see that it would succeed as a proposition.
Premier, where are you expecting to be at the end of this process? Is this where you say yay or nay to a storage facility, and then what is the process from there?
Yeah, and then I think that's where you'd be, and then the next step would be a more specific proposal, and which is a more detailed proposition about exactly what sort of facility and where it would be, and that involves another process, which is another very significant exercise. And it also triggers a range of discussions with a federal government, with international partners, a whole range of things. But there's a threshold question. You wouldn't do all those things unless you first pass that threshold question.
And I know it's early, but have you given any thought as to how such a proposal might be financed? Is the government doing any investigations in that?
The Royal Commission makes it clear that you would get pre-commitment from any international partner, and indeed you would require that international partner to finance the project. It's not something that the state government would finance off its own balance sheet, and nor does the Royal Commissioner think that would be necessary. You remember that the international partners we're talking about just simply have no solution to their present nuclear waste needs, and they, in many respects, have very substantial sums of money that they have available to apply to this, but they just have no solution.
We've already seen a divided community to some degree over this question. Do you see a risk of having a divided Labor Party by the year's end?
Well, they're all propositions, but I'm confident in the maturity of my colleagues, and indeed the maturity and intelligence of the South Australian community. I think we can conduct this debate. And I've said before, in a sense, this is a test of our democracy. Can we have a mature and reasoned debate about this issue? and come up with a wise judgment. And there's no wrong answer here. I mean, we as a community, the critical issue is for us to entertain this question carefully and come up with a wise judgment about the future. And there should be no recriminations against anybody that holds a differing view about this matter.
You said that this won't proceed if one of the major parties breaks off and doesn't support it. Does that include Federal Labor, and how important is it to win their support?
I think ultimately you would need political consensus at a national level, but that's the threshold question is whether you get a political consensus at a state level. So I don't think there's a whole series of things that would need to change before this would be possible, but we're not really at that level of approaching the federal authority.
Premier, it's obviously timely though when you're talking at a federal level about the Greens talking about the possibility of entering a coalition with the Labor Party to form a minority government. There are potential roadblocks there, aren't there?
Look, I mean, that's so many steps down the path. It rather presupposes a certain election outcome. It presupposes the outcome of this process. I mean, I think we'll cross that bridge when we come to it.
Premier, do you see, and you may have said it before and I can pick it up, do you see Lee Creek as a possibility being geologically and economically requiring assistance for the high-level dump there?
I don't think this process has dealt with the question of siting in a detail. Well, it calls for that work to happen.
But do you see Lee Creek as a possibility?
Look, that's never been raised as one of the potential sites. I don't know whether its geological circumstances fit this, but obviously it stands to reason that any facility of this sort would be in the more remote northern areas of the state, precisely where I don't think has been the subject of any analysis yet.
How do you imagine that process of a site actually working out? Because that's likely to be the most, one of many controversial elements, but that would come after this process, and then you would have a similar thing occur at a local level.
It would require a much more specific community consent at a local level. But there are communities. I mean, what we've seen in other countries is that there've actually been competing propositions from local communities. Obviously, it would be accompanied by pretty substantial local benefits if a choice was to be made of this sort. So what you saw were competitive, almost bidding process from communities, once subject to, of course, the geological circumstances being appropriate.
So will that geological survey begin sort of immediately to work out which parts are knocked out?
We've had discussions about that. I mean, that exercise would require the application of pretty substantial resources. There are differing estimates, but up to $1 billion, depending on... In a sense, it's the opposite of our present PACE program. It's searching for the lack of mineral resources rather than searching for the presence of mineral resources, because what you don't want to do is to be citing this on the side of a rich resource, whether it be copper, gold or uranium indeed. So the question becomes searching for the absence of mineral resources, and that would require another very substantial mapping exercise. I think about 25% of the state has been mapped using electromagnetic data, and that exercise would be triggered if we were to take the next step.
So it might cost $1 billion to work out which area.
That was an estimate that was given to us by officers of the Royal Commission, but once again, you would only entertain such a thing as if you had a national partner, an international.
So that might be part of the pre-commitment, as if the state. Okay.
The Independent Advisory Board and Government Agency, where does that tie into this? Are they running the citizens' jury, or is it two different things?
They'll be supervising the whole of the community engagement process, and we hope to have them in place very soon. So we're making a call for people to participate in that. We've already given consideration to some of the potential members, and we hope to be in a position to announce the composition of the advisory board shortly. In terms of the agency, it will be an attached office to the Department of Premier and Cabinet with its own separate organisational integrity. It will include some of the officers of the Royal Commission, so we're trying to capture some of the corporate knowledge so that can be taken over and become part of the new agency, which will take forward the community engagement. I mean, if ultimately there was a decision to press ahead with this process, you would always want to have a continuing community engagement capacity, because as the Royal Commissioner said, that this community consent has to be continuously reinforced and won, and that will have a lot to do with the transparency and the way in which you involve handing over information to the community.
What do you anticipate will be the constitution of the agency? It's going to be sort of what, independent experts with.
Well, we're drawing on the experts that the people that were involved in the Royal Commission and other public servants to essentially support the agency. So it'll be people with public relations expertise. Remembering at this early stage it is fundamentally a public relations and engagement exercise. But obviously the advisory board will have expertise, and expertise will be brought in from time to time. It's also worth remembering that Mr Scarce, the former Royal Commissioner, will be invited to have a continuing role in explaining his report, and he will seek to draw in those experts that informed his report so that people will be able to keep consulting that foundation of fact.
Do you anticipate he'll run the agency, or
no? He won't run the agency. He'll remain separate, but in a sense on call to assist us to talk to the report. Thank you.